Oof. Okay, where to begin with this review? I guess I'll start by pointing out that basically every major gaming news outlet had nothing but bad things to say about Forspoken, with almost all of them regurgitating the same talking points, calling the game a jack of all trades, master of none, or stating that the open world was empty, the main character and dialogue were cringy, the story was boring, the game's graphics lacked some serious polish. There also seemed to be a 50-50 split on the game's combat and gameplay, with some people praising how the game played and some people calling it lackluster. With all that being said, and after playing it myself, all I can ask in response to all these statements is, did we play the same game, or did you not play it at all? Forspoken is a hell of a time, and I had to force myself to put it down when I had to put it down. Shit, there were times that I was playing when I was supposed to be working. This new IP from Square Enix was an incredibly fun gaming experience that takes place in an interesting world with plenty of lore. The combat and gameplay are addicting. The story, although a little cliche, made sense to me, and it had a really cool twist towards the end of the second act. Don't worry, though, there are no major story spoilers here. Don't get me wrong, though, as much as I enjoyed my time with Forspoken, it certainly has its fair share of glaring issues, and I don't plan on letting it off the hook for those issues, even though I had a good time playing the game. In this review, I'm going to go over why I believe Forspoken was unfairly judged by the gaming media, while also pointing out why it's a poor representation of what current generation games should be. Hello everyone, my name is Brent, and this is my review for Forspoken. Let's begin with the story, characters, and dialogue. The story centers around Frey, a young woman from New York who grew up an orphan and constantly in trouble with the law. After a few incidents that caused her to lose her home, she decides the only way out is to essentially remove herself from the situation. Just as she's about to remove herself, she feels this power emanating from an apartment nearby, where she finds a golden cuff. She puts on said cuff and is immediately isekai'd to another world. By the way, I'm going to be using the word isekai here and there in this review, so here's a brief explanation. Isekai is a Japanese word that roughly translates to other world, and it's a genre that sees the main character teleported to another world and is often used in manga and Japanese light novel series. A few popular examples of isekai are Sword Art Online, That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, and The Rising of the Shield Hero. Anyways, back to the review. Frey finds herself in a new world known as Athia and is able to talk to the cuff on her arm and names him Cuff, much to his displeasure. Frey soon encounters monsters and other kinds of enemies and is able to fend them off with the magic she has gained from Cuff. She also learns that this country she has landed in is suffering from the Break, which kills most humans that are exposed to it or turns them into different kinds of monsters, and the only way to stop the Break is to defeat the rulers of this country known as the Tantas. So that's a brief explanation of the story, and to me at least, the story has a solid premise. The issue is that it's a typical isekai premise. Ultimately, I have no problem with this story because I like the isekai genre. The problem is that a lot of isekai stories are generally the same and rather predictable. So I understand why a lot of people don't like this rather safe way of storytelling. The main premise of most isekais is the main character is whisked away to another world and is that world's savior because of how overly powerful they are. However, where the story really shines is in its rich lore. Scattered around the ruins of Athia, you'll find hundreds of lore entries that detail how the country once was and how it came to be in its current state. Ranging from the Tantas and how they were before their descent into madness, Athia's war with the Redig, and the arrival of the demon Susurrus. Finding and reading these lore entries adds more context to Frey's journey and the world of Athia. Let's talk about Frey, Cuff, and the other characters within the story. Frey is an interesting character to say the least, and Forspoken is very much a coming-of-age story for her. Now, is Frey a well-written character? I don't know. I think she's alright. Her predicament and her reactions to said predicament are understandable. She's a homeless girl who spent most of her life in the system and struggled with the law. Then, all of a sudden, she's thrusted into this unknown world whose inhabitants now depend on her to solve that world's problems. I think her hesitancy to do so is reasonable, and her hesitancy to trust these people is also warranted. So all of that I get. But there are some instances in the story where she becomes incredibly rude and verbally hostile to the people who are just trying to help her and prove to her that they can be trusted. It was in these moments where all I could think was, alright Frey, cool your jets, your anger towards these people is completely unrealistic. Overall, I had no problems with Frey as a character. She was fairly believable, and it was fun to watch her story unfold. One of the ways this game truly failed was in the citizens of Cipal, which is your main hub. These side characters had the potential to be really interesting and help flesh out the world from different perspectives. The only characters you really kinda got to know were Auden and Robian, but you really didn't get to know them that much. Without spoiling anything, Auden and Robian really should have been fleshed out more based off the information that you received in the final act of the game. They could have brought more insight on the Tontus and how they used to be. Johidi was also someone who was incredibly wasted. I can only imagine the stuff that she could have filled us in on or helped us get to help make Frey stronger. Don't get me wrong, we do a few missions, but it wasn't much. Even the Tontas were wasted. These are the bad guys of the game, and they're nothing more than set pieces that you have to fight. Honestly, the developers should have ditched some of the other weird busy work the game has us do and put in relationship quests for some of these side characters. Last and certainly not least is Cuff, and I want to couple his character with how I feel about the dialogue because most of the dialogue in the game is between him and Frey. Personally, I really like Cuff. I found his banter with Frey to be incredibly funny, and I felt like they had great chemistry. It does get repetitive when you're out in the open world, but that is something that you can actually turn off in the settings. However, the cutscene dialogue between the two was always entertaining, and their chemistry makes some of the more awkward dialogue tolerable. All in all, the dialogue isn't as bad as everyone is making it out to be. It's just typical cheesy isekai dialogue. I don't know, maybe I'm just used to it. To me, the dialogue makes sense for the type of character Frey is and the extraordinary circumstances she has found herself in. Overall, I found the story and lore interesting. However, besides Frey and Cuff, the characters that inhabit the story left much to be desired. Forspoken's map is huge. Trust me, I know. Besides finding all the treasure chests, I cleared the whole thing. So I want to set the record straight on something. The map isn't empty. There are tons of places to go and tons of stuff to do. Sure, there are occasionally large sections of the map that don't have anything going on in them, but there's an in-game explanation as to why there isn't anything going on. The break has wiped almost everything out. While playing Forspoken, I really tried to understand this complaint that everybody had, but I couldn't. I had so much fun traversing the vast emptiness of Athia that I hardly noticed or cared that there wasn't anything going on. And it never took me long to get to somewhere that did have something going on. Athia has a plethora of destinations you can go to, and most of them will reward you with something upon completing some sort of objective at any given destination. There are ruins and caves that usually hold some kind of item or interesting tidbit of lore. There are locked labyrinths that have a mini-boss at the end and will always reward you with a powerful piece of armor. If you want to test your combat and traversal skills, you can take part in various time challenges throughout the map. You can also find Tanta familiars and take photos to show the kids back in Cipal. These particular activities were honestly incredibly meh, and it was incredibly tedious to have to get all of these. Nevertheless, it adds to the stuff that you can find on the map. There were also many towers and ruins that you can find that were inflicted with these things called break storms that you had to clear out. Last and certainly not least, there are tons of monuments spread throughout the map that you can find to boost your various stats. The only argument that I can understand from anybody is that all of this stuff is cliche open world nonsense, and collecting all of it can feel like a chore and become repetitive. I can also agree with anyone who might say that the open world is just too big. However, to say the open world is empty, even though that there's a solid in-game explanation as to why it's empty, is incredibly disingenuous. Where this game truly shines is in its gameplay. Frey has an overabundance of magical abilities and traversal techniques that makes every combat encounter a spectacle and every trip to the next destination exhilarating. Over the course of the game, Frey will unlock magic from each element. First, she starts with Earth, which is good for short and mid-range attacks. Second, she'll get Fire, which is more of a melee-type magic, even though there are some ranged options. Third, she'll get Water, which is for longer ranged attacks. Last, and my personal favorite, is Electricity, which is for faster, weaker attacks that lock onto enemies. Each of these magic trees have several types of primary and secondary attacks, along with a large finishing AoE attack. Furthermore, each element skill tree adds new traversal abilities that will help Frey get to different and more difficult places. There's also a decent enough collecting and crafting system to help boost your necklace and cloak stats. It's a typical go out in the open world, defeat enemies, pick up the materials they drop, craft them into better materials, and then use said materials to boost your armor stats. I won't go into it any further, it's not a bad system, it's just nothing special or super intricate. While playing Forspoken, I was able to get the Platinum Trophy, and whenever I get a Platinum, I like to give a breakdown and some tips so that way you can get it for yourself. Forspoken is a fairly easy Platinum to achieve, it's just really grindy. To get the Platinum, you of course have to complete the main story along with all the side quests, with some of these side quests not being available until after you beat the game. Where things get grindy is unlocking all the spells and then upgrading all of the spells. With that being said, I suggest getting started on unlocking and upgrading your spells as early as possible so that way you don't have too much to do in the post-game in that regard. To upgrade all your spells, you have to use each spell in a specific way a certain number of times. Also want to mention that this spell's upgrade has a bug in it. In order to upgrade this spell, you need to defeat an enemy while Cuff's shield is broken before getting killed. Beyond just grinding out all of these spells, you also have to visit and complete about 90% of what there is to do on the map. This includes, but not limited to, going out and completing all the time challenge monuments, collect all the familiars, find all the armor pieces, and fighting the 4 powerful mini-bosses that are in each of the major sections of the map. However, these guys are pretty easy if you've upgraded all of your spells. Some might find this kind of platinum to be a chore, and there were definitely some times that I felt that way as well, but the fun traversal in combat kept me going and kept me playing. Oh, and there's a horrible dancing minigame that you have to complete for this plat as well. These things are the bane of my existence, and whoever started this trend sucks. So far, I feel like I've been fair in my assessment for Forspoken. The game is loads of fun and addicting, and for me, that's what's important in a video game. However, I do know the importance of how a game is supposed to look and be optimized in this day and age, and Forspoken is not up to par with what a current generation game should look like. Outside of major cutscenes, Frey looks kinda goofy, and the characters that she interacts with are rather lifeless. Ugh, and starting a conversation with someone often triggers this weird delay before a conversation actually starts. I will say though, this game loads super fast and it's even acknowledged by Cuff.
We're here.
That really was miraculously fast.
Also, I'm not one to gripe over frame rate dips because I just don't care so long as the game doesn't crash. I will say prior to starting the game, I made sure to set my preference to graphics instead of performance, so I can maintain at least 30 frames per second most of the time due to having heard of horrible frame rate dips. This worked out really well, however, even with that in place, there were many times that the game dipped below 30 when there was just too much happening on screen. All in all, the game is a lot of fun, but it plays like an early PS4 title. Well, let's wrap this up. I spent around 70 hours in Forspoken, and referring back to the question that I asked at the beginning of this review, I'm genuinely wondering what game all of the gaming media outlets played that I didn't. I also really want to know what part of this game hurt them so much to outright say that it is bad, because by no means is it a bad game. Here's the thing, normally I wouldn't question this so much, but most of the reviews from regular old gamers such as myself have been very positive, and I know some incredibly tough video game critics that also played it and really enjoyed the game. So that's why I'm wondering if we played the same game. Don't get me wrong, the game isn't perfect by any stretch of the meaning. It looks like a PS4 game and has some serious optimization issues, but if you can manage to look past that, Forspoken may surprise you. It's got some interesting characters even though they're somewhat underdeveloped. Frey might be an angry young adult, but she's been thrusted into an impossible situation that she would never have imagined herself to be in. The gameplay is a lot of fun, and even if there are some areas that might feel empty, it won't take you that long to get to somewhere that does have something to do. Anyways, I gotta give props to Square Enix for taking a risk on a new IP, and I hope that they can eventually expand on it. But I know that's probably wishful thinking at this point. Well, I hope you enjoyed this review, and if you did and want to see more videos just like it, please drop a like and a sub. It really helps us out a lot. In the meantime, everyone, take care.